you gotta start thinking, okay, is my mental health, is that one of the underlying causes that's going on here?
I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Gregory Scott Brown. How you doing, Dr. Gregory?
I'm doing all right, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I wanted to have you on, man, because your new book, The Self-Healing Mind, is a very important topic, which is about mental health. And mental health is not talked about a whole lot, especially in men, for God's sakes. So I wanted to kind of really kind of go into the weeds with you a little bit about that. But before we get started, how did you start this journey into mental health and writing this book and everything that you've discovered?
I'll tell you, man, this book has been years in the making. That's because when I was in my early 20s, I actually struggled with depression. I didn't know what I was experiencing at the time. I didn't have a name for it. I just knew that I did not feel well. And that's something over the next several years that I grappled with. I wasn't one that actually was able to establish regular care with a mental health care professional, but I serendipitously happened upon self-care. So I was able to tap into yoga, into spirituality, and I fortunately got better. Now, I understand that many people aren't as lucky or blessed as I was. In the United States alone, there are over 140 suicides a day on average. But I'll tell you that today, as a psychiatrist, I'm one that totally recommends medications and therapy when patients are able to establish care with a mental health professional. But I also think that we need to really spend a lot of time talking about evidence-based self-care, because that can help people get better as well.
Yeah. And in the long term, hopefully, if we can do it with self-care,
Right.
it's a better thing for everybody involved.
Right. And so a lot of times people ask me, okay, should I do self-care? Should I do meds? Should I do therapy? Where should I start? And I often tell them all of the above. I mean, these are things that work together.
Absolutely. Now, why do you believe that men have such a problem discussing mental health? I was raised in a Latino community, culture. So, men never once in a million years have my grandparents or my father, my father's generation ever speak about mental health ever. It was just a tab. It just never came up. It just
Right.
literally is like unicorns. I never heard him talk about unicorns because it just never came up. It's that something you talk about. So why do men have such a problem doing that, talking about it?
I'll tell you, I'm speaking as a man of color as well. I'm an African-American guy. And I think that men in general struggle with this idea of being vulnerable, right? I mean, there are cultural expectations, I think, that suggest that we need to man up, that it's a sign of weakness if we talk about anything related to mental health. But I'll tell you, I think it's particularly exacerbated within communities of color. And I think that, again, the more people can see and hear conversations like the one we're having today, the more they can hear people like me saying, hey, I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a man of color, I'm a young guy, in my late 30s, but hey, I struggled with depression too. I was able to make it through. I was able to get better. I have no shame when it comes to talking about that. Will help encourage other people to get the help they need and reduce that stigma.
Yeah. And I think, in current years, a lot of very high profile people have started to come out publicly about their mental health struggles, which has helped a lot. Someone like The Rock, who is the epitome of testosterone. One of the I love the man, but he is, when you think of a guy's guy, it's not much more guy you get than The Rock.
Right.
And he's very openly talked about his mental health struggles, his mental health history in his family, what his mother went through, and it's hopefully shining a little bit of a light, because I agree with you, guys. We are, as we grow up, what do we say? Don't cry.
Right.
Don't cry, man up. What are you, a little girl? Like these kind of comments that you would hear all your life. So you're afraid of being vulnerable.
Right.
Luckily for me, I've been surrounded by women my entire life.
Yeah.
Single mom. I have nothing but women in my house right now, daughters, everything. So I've always been a very open guy and very in touch with that kind of, vulnerability, because it's just I was surrounded by it. I wasn't surrounded by an obscene amount of testosterone growing up. But even with that, it was still difficult to approach mental health and approach even admitting to yourself that you're like, I might be depressed or I might be going through something. What are some keys that you can, share with the audience about seeing it within themselves? Like, because you might not know that you're depressed. You might be sad, but there's a big difference between being sad and being depressed. What are those kind of things you should be looking out for?
You were spot on, man. You should have been a psychiatrist. I mean,
I appreciate that.
This is great. I just want to rewind a little bit here. From my clinical experience, I'll tell you, oftentimes, the men, when they come to see me, it's usually a woman in their life, whether it's their wife or their girlfriend or their mom,
daughter,
dragging them in, kicking and screaming, right? Because we just struggle, admitting to ourselves that we have these same issues that, women have and everyone has, right? If we're just being honest here. And so I just want to say, anytime someone is, noticing that they're not as productive as they once were, or they find themselves even like being more irritable with their partner, being, more impatient, struggling in the bedroom, having issues with sex. I mean, having issues with sleep, any of these things that can seemingly cause functional impairment that can get in the way of us living optimally. You gotta start thinking, okay, is my mental health, is that one of the underlying causes that's going on here? And usually I'll tell you, when someone comes to me in clinic, oftentimes they're saying, okay, I'm not depressed. I'm just drinking too much at night, or, I'm not anxious. Maybe I have, ADHD or whatever. I mean, anxiety and depression in particular, I've noticed just hold this heavy stigma among men. And I think, again, the more that we're open about, the more people like The Rock who come out and say, hey, man, I'm a guy's guy, but I deal with these things too. And here's what I do that can help me. I think that, that really encourages other men to have those conversations that they need to have.
And then what are those kind of things that you should look for in yourself to see if you are depressed or are you just sad? Right. And what's the difference?
So the main difference is that sadness is an emotion that comes and goes, right? It's fleeting. And usually, I mean, many people don't think about this, but you were spot on with this. When someone is depressed, oftentimes they're not even feeling sad. They just don't feel anything. They feel
numb.
They feel numb. They feel empty. They feel apathetic, and they're wanting to feel something, right? And so the other thing you want to think about is if, whatever that lack of feeling, that apathy, that depressed mood, if it's lasting for at least 2 weeks, most days, right? So if you're experiencing, a depressed mood, you're having trouble sleeping, you're noticing that your appetite, you're either overeating or you're not eating at all, if you're feeling guilty or worthless, and God forbid, if you're having thoughts about ending your life, I mean, those are all indicators that you might be depressed.
Now, I remember growing up, I can remember 3 times I had an anxiety attack. I didn't know what it was at the time. This is young, when I was in my 20s and 20s and early 30s. And they were both, I come from the film industry. So I was directing my first big project, literally had an anxiety attack in the bathroom. I was like, guys, I need a minute. Walked in, had a full-blown anxiety attack, sat in there, and I started doing deep breathing. I didn't know what meditation really was, but I just closed my eyes and just started to try to meditate, to be able to gather myself to go back on, because it was all in my head. That was like me constantly creating things that weren't really there. Second time that happened, same thing. It was a project. The whole thing was going to fall apart. It was like the next day, and my producer dropped the ball, and it was all falling. I mean, I had spending tens of thousands of dollars at the moment. And then another time was a family situation where I had a relative pass away, unresolved issues and things like that. So those are the only times I remember having a full blown. But I remember what it felt like.
Mhm.
It is a horrible, horrible feeling. You feel like you're dying.
Yeah.
And is there any advice you can give to people about how to deal with an anxiety attack when it happens? And in your opinion, do you believe that anxiety, because from my perspective, anxiety attacks are completely created within yourself. I mean, look, if there's a tiger right there, you can get as anxious as you want because that's called nature. But when there's no danger around you, physical danger or any other things like that, your mind is creating it all. And you just go down a deep rabbit hole, and it's hard to pull the brakes when you start going all the way down. That's when, start doing it. So what's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing we need to recognize, a couple of things here. So we're all anxious. We're supposed to be anxious, Alex. And a lot of times I tell folks that, even on podcasts like this, I'm like, you have anxiety, I have anxiety. And the host is like, what do you mean I have anxiety? I don't have anxiety, right? Speak for yourself, man. But I mean, we all have anxiety. We're supposed to have anxiety. That's how we get up in the morning, right? And there's that fear in our head about losing our job if we don't show up for work. That's anxiety. And that's how anxiety can be used in an adaptive way to get us up and about and moving throughout our lives, right? When we feel hungry, right? And our heart starts to beat a little bit faster because we haven't had food to eat. It's anxiety that gets us to go into our kitchen, make ourselves a sandwich, right? When we're in situations where there's a very real threat. I mean, if we're out camping and a bear comes up in the woods, right? It's anxiety that causes us to get away from that threat, right? So
it's a stress release of like is that the stress hormone or something like that?
The fight and flight response,
correct,
right? That cause our heart to beat faster and our pupils to dilate. So we have a wider range of vision, blood to flow to our skeletal muscles so we can run away or protect ourselves when we need to. So we need that. Now, if we're in a situation where, as you mentioned, the anxiety is just creeping up on us, there's not really a visible threat there, even though there's a perceived threat, and anxiety is getting in the way of us living our lives rather than helping us live our lives. And that's when it can become problematic. Okay. And, you've had a panic attack. One time, I'll tell you, several years ago, and I was totally embarrassed about this, but I was sitting in a doctor's office for my annual physical exam, and I graduated from medical school at the time. So it's like when I'm in the doctor's office, I know what they're looking for. I know what they're listening for when they put on the stethoscope. And that just kind of freaked me out in that moment. And I had a panic attack sitting right there on the table. It's like I couldn't talk. My heart was beating like 120 beats per minute. I was just totally freaked out. And my doc was like, but you're a psychiatrist, right? And I was like stammering over my words. And, I mean, these stories can seem embarrassing, but I just say it to encourage the audience, the listeners here, that these are things that, they're normal. We experience them, right? Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, things like deep breathing can help. Meditation can help over time. But again, sometimes there are things you just have to ride out and understand that an anxiety attack's not going to kill you, and it's totally normal.
It's funny because you were cursed with too much information.
I was cursed with too much information. Sometimes ignorance is bliss, my friend. I'm telling you.
You know what? I've told people that so much. Like, you get into things, and sometimes you're like, man, if I would have known what I would have never gotten out of my bed if I would have known what was going on. But because that's why youth is so wonderful, and it's so moronic at the same time.
Yeah.
So you wrote in your book about the 5 pillars of self-care. Mm-hmm. What are the 5 pillars of self-care in your opinion?
The ones I focus on the book: sleep, spirituality, nutrition, breath work, and movement. And so some people ask me, why don't you put going to therapy in there? I mean, that can definitely be useful. I am a staunch advocate of therapy. I support psychiatric medications. But again, when we're talking about self-care, these 5 pillars that I mentioned in the book are things that don't cost any money. We all have access to them, right? And they're things that can work alongside therapy and medications if you need them to really help folks improve their mental health.
Let me ask you, is because I'm a mind nerd, a neuroscience nerd, so I love reading about the mind and how the mind works. A lot of times, in your opinion, when you start going down this depression road, is that a hard wiring in the mind that creates these kind of pathways that over years can be extremely difficult? That's why it's so difficult to break out of them if you've had long-term depression. Even if you're able to pull yourself out of it, you could fall back into it because that groove, that connection hasn't been severed or reprogrammed or rewired in some way. Is that a true statement?
So that is one of the ideas that got me interested in psychiatry. I don't think there's an answer to it at this point. There's still surprisingly very little we know about the mind. Some will suggest that depression is a result of chemical imbalances of serotonin and norepinephrine and dopamine. But I think it's more than that. I don't think that our minds and our brains are just, and the way we behave are just because of the chemicals in our brain and the way that our brain is wired. Even though some psychiatrists with huge followings and written many books might disagree with that. Go ahead.
No, but do you believe that, because from my understanding, my rudimentary understanding of the mind is extremely rudimentary. We as a species, we like comfort boxes, our safe spots, like our comfort zones, if you will. And because the comfort zones are what made us survive over the course of, thousands and thousands of years, because if we know everything that's around us, we're safe. But the tiger around the corner that we can't see is what we're afraid of. But that comfort zone could easily be negative. It could be abusive, because that's all you know. It could be depression, because that's all you know. So like, if I'm not depressed, I'm not comfortable. In a weird way, your mind is like, am I wrong? What do you think?
So you're not incorrect in saying that. Okay. And I'll say that, one of my favorite articles that I encourage folks to read is an article called The Depressed Person, right? So anyway, this idea that some people are just so used to being in this depressed state, right? That they've been in this state for 20 years, 30 years. They have a melancholic personality.
We all know those people.
If you will, right? And so the idea of getting better, whatever that means, can seem foreign. It can seem scary, and they'd rather, even if it's not necessarily a conscious decision, revert back into that depressed state because that's what they're familiar with. And Alex, just one more thing you have to think about, you see this all the time in trauma, right? So people who maybe had an abusive parent when they were a kid, physical abuse, sexual abuse. And in that kid's mind, it's like, okay, mom and dad are supposed to love me, right? And this is how they're showing love, even if it's in a perverse or a sick way. And so then that person, when they're an adult, they establish a relationship with a spouse or a partner who's also abusive, because again, in their mind, this is what love is. This is how people show love. And sometimes it takes time in session with a psychiatrist or a therapist to break that negative cycle, to rewire that thought process, to show patients that, hey, this is not what love has to be. There's something else there.
It was funny because I remember growing up, I was a lovesick kid growing up. I was always in love and having my heart broken constantly. It was just like a constant thing for me, to the point where I basically would actually go after girls who would never in a million years date me when I was younger, because I almost like a high of being depressed. And what did I do when the moment of the heartbreak came? You'd go home and listen to sad music to wallow in this space. Why do we do things like that? Why do we, like, when you're sad, listen to sad music? Like, why would we do that?
I think that we find something again in that moment comforting about it. It's like, if you're feeling like, if you're at a party and you're really not into the party and everyone around you is having fun, it's like that something about that will just bother you, right? You're like, why don't they feel the way I feel, right? And I also think, I mean, when it comes to, listening to sad music, I think there's something cathartic too, and being able to in that moment experience a good cry. We were talking about crying earlier. I cry every once in a while. I'm sure you do.
We do. Of course.
It's something that we need. And I think that, things like that can be therapeutic.
As long as you don't live there. That's the thing. It's like, if it comes and goes, it's fine.
Right.
But 7 months of listening to sad music, there's a problem.
Right. And the other thing, again, we just really want to keep in mind and keep bringing back is this idea of functional impairment, right? Which every single day, or most days, you're just not able to do what you need to do. But sadness is a normal emotion that all of us experience from time to time.
Now, coming from a medical background like yourself, you talk about meditation. I've talked about meditation heavily on the show because I've had experts on it. Can you just discuss quickly about the health benefits that happen in the mind when you meditate, in the sense of releasing those chemicals that help you bring down your blood pressure, help. I mean, I did blood work and the doctor's like, you meditate, don't you? Like, I go, yeah, why? She's like, because a man of your age shouldn't have these numbers. So you're doing something different than my other patients are. I'm like, yeah, I meditate a lot. So that's one of the reasons, but I'd love to hear your point of view on it.
So meditation is all about conscious awareness, right? Being in that moment, oftentimes focusing on your breath, drawing your attention to the way that you're breathing. In the book, I outline a number of different breathwork strategies. So if someone's listening to this, they're like, I don't even know where to start. Whenever I start reading about meditation, I think I need to, convert to Buddhism and join a, fancy meditation center. No, you don't have to do that. Right. And so the thing about meditation, what's going on in the brain, again, when you really draw your attention to your breath, you are activating something called the parasympathetic nervous system.
Right.
Okay. And that's the opposite of the fight or flight response we were talking about earlier when you are exposed to a threat. So when the parasympathetic nervous system is activated, you notice a drop in blood pressure. You're flooding your brain with inhibitory neurotransmitters like GABA. And so GABA can help reduce anxiety. Also, you are increasing alpha wave activity in the brain, which is also a physiological marker of rest and relaxation. So I think of meditation, if there are any other football fans out there, on Thanksgiving Day, if your family is like mine, we're watching the Detroit Lions, you stuff your face full of turkey. And then after you're full, you're just kind of like in this Zen mode, right? And so that's kind of the state that meditation can help reproduce.
Without the cholesterol.
Without the cholesterol. Lean turkey, man. Lean turkey.
Now, speaking of food, what part does food play in your mental health? Because I can tell you when I used to eat In-N-Out, it felt good going in.
Yeah.
Didn't feel that
coming out, huh?
No. Well, definitely didn't feel good coming out, but didn't feel good 20, 30 minutes later. I was just like, just not a great feeling. Yeah. And I've noticed that as you get older, as we both get older, we understand that you can't do things that you did in your 20s. But food does have an effect, especially the kind of food you're eating. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
The first thing about, and I'll tell you this, I've learned from thousands of clinical conversations at this point that food is a really sensitive topic, even with a lot of guys, right? I'm not here to shame anyone and say you got to totally revamp your diet. You can't ever enjoy an In-N-Out burger or a beer or a glass of wine. I mean,
sure.
The thing that we want to keep in mind is that, nutrition definitely plays a role in both physical and mental health. Okay. And what we're learning is that, just like these physical health conditions like obesity and hypertension and high cholesterol are related to inflammation, so are conditions like anxiety and depression and ADHD. And so there are certain anti-inflammatory foods that we can put in our body that can help. And so there's actually a big study that came out several years ago called the SMILES trial, Alex, which showed that people who were depressed and incorporated more of a Mediterranean diet had better outcomes. And one of the reasons is related to the fact that Mediterranean foods can help reduce inflammation. So we're talking about omega-3 fatty acids that are found in oily fish like salmon, mackerel, and tuna. You want to make sure you're getting enough leafy green vegetables, which actually act as precursors for some of these neurotransmitters that are important for mood, like serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, and that you're getting enough prebiotics, right? Because we know that when we're stressed, that can actually cause something called dysbiosis of the microbiome, and it can deplete some of those prebiotics. So nutrition is definitely important, and we're learning more about it every day.
Yeah, and I've had multiple experts on the show talking about the microbiome and how all, like, it seems like just recently everyone just figured out that the microbiome is the key to so much mental health, physical health, even more so than anybody ever thought of before. Having that good bacteria in your body really is a massive has massive effect on everything, on every functioning part of your body.
Right, right. I mean, and again, I think it's just such a fascinating area. And the thing about nutrition is that, again, when I'm talking about Mediterranean diet, we don't necessarily have to, again, eat Mediterranean every day, but think of making your diet more Mediterranean-ish, right? So Eat what you eat, but make small changes where you can.
Have a cheat day. Have a couple cheat days.
I won't tell anyone. It's okay.
Exactly. Now, another part of one of your other pillars is spirituality.
Yes.
What part does spirituality play in mental health? I'm really curious about your thoughts on this.
This is one of my favorite conversations because I'll tell you, most people, when they hear the word spirituality, the first thing that comes to mind is what?
Religion. Oh, religion. Yeah, of course.
Religion, right? And so what's important to keep in mind is that religion is just one of many aspects of spirituality. So you don't have to be religious to benefit from a spiritual practice for improving your mental health. So spirituality is all about connection. That might mean connecting with your inner self through something like meditation, as we were speaking about earlier. It might mean connecting with your external environment through altruism or selfless service, volunteering your time, just doing something kind for someone else, right? Maybe it means connecting with a higher power through prayer, if you are religious, okay? Now, the science behind this, studies have shown that people who are able to tap into that inner spirituality are able to reduce activity in an area of the brain called the default mode network. Now, some people refer to the default mode network as the mind's mind. So when we're just sitting down, watching Netflix, daydreaming, not really thinking about anything, that's when your default mode network is most active. Studies have shown that people who struggle with anxiety or burnout, or people who are overworked, the default mode network is overly active all the time. It's like the mind's mind is just on. And a spiritual practice can actually help quiet that, to help reduce that activity. And the long-term effect is that it can help reduce perceptions of physical pain as well as emotional pain.
It's really interesting because, there's in spirituality, again, you can talk about meditation, it's going inward and things like that. So you talked a little bit about burnout. I think we all are so stressed out and are constantly, especially here in the West, going nonstop. I'm trying to do better myself personally. But what can you do to avoid the burnout? And how do you even know if you are burning out? Are you burning out?
So the important thing to keep in mind is that burnout is not a clinical diagnosis yet, right? Now, the World Health Organization has recognized it as a thing that we should be paying attention to. And what's important to realize is that, if you find yourself, not really excited about getting up and getting going with your day, if you find yourself avoiding some of the things that you used to love, just feeling kind of wired and tired and stressed out all the time. I mean, those could be signs of burnout. And many of those symptoms, Alex, overlap with symptoms of depression, right? So the way I think of burnout is it's like an indicator that maybe you might be sliding into something a little bit more serious as far as a mental illness is concerned. So it's definitely worth paying attention to. Self-care can help with burnout, right? So the pillars that we speak about, sleep, spirituality, nutrition, breath work, movement, really tapping in to those strategies sometimes is enough to stave off burnout for turning into something worse. But sometimes, again, it makes sense if you feel like you're burned out, picking up the phone, making connection with a therapist or a psychiatrist, because they can help distinguish burnout from depression.
Now, everything we've been talking about as far as mental health is concerned, there is one element that is constant, which is the inner voice, the monkey brain, that little voice that is constantly talking to you inside your mind. And most of the time, it is a negative voice. You generally don't have a voice going, man, you're great today. You're looking fantastic. Look at you. That happens once in a blue moon. Generally, and it's something I'm sure you as well as is negative bias, which is part of our evolution, is being negative, it will keep you alive.
Right.
If everything is, rainbows and unicorns, the tiger will eat you. So now that we don't generally have tigers are about to eat us, how can we calm that calm the mind, quiet the monkey brain and that negative, but specifically that negative voice, and how not to pay attention as much to it and so on?
This might be a bit of reverse psychology here, but I think it really stems from this idea of radical acceptance, which, again, we don't have time to go into here, but I encourage all of the listeners to read about radical acceptance, about Marsha Linehan's great work that she's done there. But I think that we really have to, rather than trying to ignore that negative voice, we have to accept that it's going to be there. It's something that all of us have, right? And I've just noticed, so I'll tell you about one of my first experiences with Yoga Nidra, which is a meditative form of yoga, right? I had just gotten off of work. I actually had my pager from the hospital on me in the yoga class, right? It's terrible. And, I'm thinking about all of the notes that I have to do when I go home, and just laying there on my back in silence. And it's like, just that chatter was just so loud. And I was trying really hard just to tune it out. And I noticed that the harder I tried, the louder that voice got, right? And so I remember at the time talking to one of my mentors, who was a seasoned psychiatrist, about that. And he made a really good recommendation to me. He said, visualize that voice as clouds in the sky, right? So use a guided imagery exercise. Acknowledge them. Acknowledge that they're going to be there and watch them float by. And in time, you notice that, that voice isn't going to kill you. The voice isn't going to destroy you, and you have more power over that voice than you think. And eventually you can learn to live with it, and it'll get quieter.
It's kind of like A Beautiful Mind in many ways. Like the movie, The Beautiful Mind. They're there. Those people are always there talking to you, because it's essentially a visual representation of the monkey brain in that movie with Russell Crowe.
I think it's funny you said that, because I just brought that up yesterday with someone. They're like, I've never seen that movie. I'm like, what? How could you not have seen A Beautiful Mind? Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. But it's so true though. Like, at the end, spoiler alert for anyone who's seen it, but those people are still there.
Right.
And he's aware of them. but he just doesn't let them control he doesn't let them run the car. He doesn't drive the car, because you might think you don't have any control,
Right.
but you truly have all the control. It's up to you how you deal with it.
Right, right. And again, the mind belongs to you. It's your mind. It's a powerful tool. Own it and love it, right? I mean, you have more control over your mind than you think.
Yeah, and it's meditation 101 is like, when you talk to a guru talking about how can you quiet the monkey mind, it's like you can't. What you can do is let those thoughts come in and go out, go in and come out, and no, don't hold on to a thought. Don't,
Right.
And then as I started doing that in my meditative practice, the chatter starts to quiet,
Right.
because it has nowhere to hold on to. So it just gets quiet to the point where there is no more chatter, and you're in a deep meditative state, which is where it was just blissful. It's wonderful.
That's spot on. That's absolutely right.
So, you also talk about physical activity, and I'd love to hear. I've heard so much over the years, like, "Oh, you're depressed, go for a walk. If you're depressed, go work out. You really got to burn that energy off." How much of that is real, and how much of that is just like folklore, if you will.
So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think because of that type of mentality, self-care has kind of gotten a bad rap in recent days, right? Some people are even calling it tyrannical, and people are, writing books saying you don't need self-care, you need, a medication. Better job, or you need a medication, right?
Right.
But, and I'll tell you this, to me, when people bash self-care, it's like saying you don't need food. You don't need water, right?
You don't need love.
You don't need love, right? What you need is, a supplement, or what you need is, more money.
Right? Buy this for me.
Yeah, right. So when it comes to physical activity, I'll tell you this, I am an evidence guy. So, I'm not going to come here and share my opinion about things if evidence doesn't support it. And what the evidence says is that people who move their bodies more, have a lower risk for developing depression, period, right? And so what we want to focus on now, if you're severely depressed, going for a walk is not going to cure your depression. And eating a kale salad is not going to cure your depression. So we're talking about a comprehensive approach here. So when we move our body, what we're doing is we're enhancing expression of a protein in the brain called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It kind of acts like fertilizer in the brain. It gets our neurons firing, our brain cells firing, so that we can reach optimal levels of serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. So there's something there. The European Psychiatric Association actually has made recommendations for exercise for mental health, which are very similar to the American Heart Association's recommendations for heart health here in the United States. That's 150 minutes of moderate activity exercise a week, but start where you can.
Now, we talked a lot about different self-care techniques that are releasing certain chemicals in your brain. It seems to me, and I'm not the first to say this, but it seems like the brain, and we have the ability to treat ourselves with the correct chemicals ourselves in our mind. It's just creating the activities to release these chemicals. That's why meditation, eating the proper diet, movement, just working out releases certain chemicals and hormones in the body that make you feel better, makes you feel happier. And this is something that is, I think, probably within the last 50 years, people, because if you would have said this in the 80s, people were like, you are a new age quack. And now there's actual evidence stating that no, meditation releases this amount of this certain kind of chemical, working out does this, food does this, connecting to a spiritual, higher purpose, higher power releases this in your mind. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about it.
I think, that's one of the things, man, I think is so cool about psychiatry. I'm totally nerding out here, but it's just all of these chemicals, they're already there, right? It's not like, even when you take a pill, right, you're not putting something new into your brain, right? You're manipulating the brain's way of absorbing the chemicals that are already there. So our brains are full of serotonin, full of melatonin, full of norepinephrine, dopamine. If you enjoy a juicy steak. When you sit down, you take that first bite of the steak and you feel that sense of just reward, like, oh man, this is so good. Your nucleus accumbens in your brain is being activated. That's the pleasure center, right? Dopamine is being released. When you fall in love, right, and you embrace your partner and that feeling of warmth that you get, I mean, it's because chemicals are being released in the brain that contribute to that. So, when you go on a run, endorphins are released in the brain, right? So in many ways, self-care strategies, again, used the right way, can act like medications, right? Can act like therapy. And especially if you're combining them with meds and therapy, I mean, you're giving yourself the best chances of getting better. And that's what I always advocate.
Yeah, I mean, and with something like meditation, I was talking to a guru the other day about this, and I was telling him, like, I feel almost addicted to the feeling, the blissful feeling that you get when you meditate now to the point where, like, I have to, if I don't meditate, I feel bad. I feel not bad like mentally. I feel physically just like I need that hour. I need that 2 hours to really connect to that, because it's a high. Because you walk out as a high. People get that from yoga. People get that from food, depending on the kind of food. I mean, look, the entire fast food industry is based around you connecting those tastes. It's salt, sugar, fat.
Yeah.
Those things make you feel good.
Yeah.
at first.
So get addicted to the healthy stuff.
Exactly.
Get addicted to the stuff that's gonna, sustain your physical and mental health.
Correct.
Long term. I mean, that's what, especially for guys, they need to hear this message. The guy is like, I don't want to try meditation. I don't want to try yoga. I mean, try it out and give yourself permission to acknowledge the way you feel afterwards, because you might get addicted to that feeling and it might ultimately improve your life.
I mean, you don't have to wear Lululemons to do yoga as a guy.
No. Yeah. You absolutely don't. Yeah.
It's fascinating. And I think it's a lot more in the West specifically that this whole kind of, I can't say that because there's many cultures around the world, but I know in the West, it's very, guys, man, and all this kind of stuff. And men don't cry, and men don't do yoga. Men don't meditate. But I think at a certain point, people have just, especially these new generations coming up, they're just like, I'm tired. This is BS. Right. This is not right. I need help. And going out to do these things and finding joy in yoga it's much more acceptable now than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was doing yoga 10 years ago, and I was one of 3 guys in the entire yoga class. Yeah. And it's just like now you look at yoga classes, it's a mix. It's all, young, old, every culture. It's becoming more acceptable. And I think that's a really great thing for all of us, but specifically guys, because women are much more open to all of this, because that's just their nature. We as guys have a struggle with all of the things that we're talking about right now.
Right. And here's why it's important too. So many people outside the field don't realize this. So women are actually diagnosed with depression twice as often as men, right? But men die by suicide 3 to 4 times as often as women do. And one of the reasons is because men are not getting treatment, right? They're not talking about these things as much. They're suffering in silence. They're stuffing it all in. And then, the stuff hits the fan and things fall apart. And so, again, I think we see people like LeBron James doing yoga, right? Where we see him on the Calm app, leading meditations, right? People like Michael Phelps, Kevin Love, Common, The Rock, all of these public men who are well-respected, and other guys admire when they're talking about these things and showing, hey, I can do it too. Then it can encourage them too as well.
Yeah, it's just like we don't have the support system that women do, because girlfriends talk. Guys don't like, dude, man, I was feeling a little depressed today, man. And I don't know how I'm going to work this out. That's not a conversation guys generally have with other guys. Guys will have that with a woman, right? But not as much. Yeah, they'll talk to their mom about it. They'll talk to their wife about it. They'll talk to maybe their sister about it, or even a girlfriend. But a guy, I think as I've gotten older, I've had those conversations with men, friends of mine, because we're all just older and a little bit wiser and a little bit more open about these things, but like, I'm struggling with this, man. Yeah. I know what you're feeling like, but when I was younger, my generation, I'm not sure how much younger or older you are from me, but, Gen X generally did not have deep conversations about their mental health at all. So, but women do have that. So that makes sense what you said, that the statistics, because women at minimum have that support group of their girlfriends and their mothers it's like part of their quote unquote culture to be able to speak like that. But men aren't generally.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times men, they don't know how to have those conversations.
As I was saying it to you, you were cracking up. You're like, "That's insane. Why would, dude? Man, after the game, I was really depressed that LeBron lost. Man, like, how do I deal with this? Like, that's not a conversation."
Right. And so, I mean, I'll tell you this. I mean, one of the, a couple of things. So, one of the most beautiful several conversations. I mean, Anderson Cooper and Colbert have a conversation about grief that I encourage everyone to watch, in the aftermath of Kobe Bryant's death. I mean, Shaquille O'Neal shed tears when he was talking about his friend
Jordan. All of them did.
Jordan. Yeah. So again, you do have men, I think, who are coming out now and showing that, hey, I have emotion. This is how I can talk to another guy about something that is eliciting a feeling, positive or negative. Right. And one more thing I'll just mention here briefly is that, I do a lot of work with Men's Health magazine. Mm-hmm. Every Friday we're on Instagram. My friend Drew Ramsey and I, Drew is a nutritional psychiatrist. And we co-host a series called Friday Sessions, where we actually have conversations about male mental health. So we can show people, not just talk about, like, go talk to another guy. We can show people what those conversations look like. And I think that's very important.
Now, you've talked about mindfulness in your book as well. How can you introduce mindfulness into a daily routine?
So for someone listening, they don't know where to start. Again, remember 2 words with mindfulness: conscious awareness. That's it. That's a good place to start. So that means, again, so often we navigate our life without even paying attention to what's going on around us. We're not plugged in, right? We might be sitting there at dinner, and I'm guilty of this all the time too. Sitting there, my wife's sitting across from me, we're enjoying a meal together, and I'm just like thinking about the next thing that I have to do, right? I'm not tasting the food. I'm not enjoying our company. I'm not paying attention. And so I have to intentionally bring myself into those moments. And when I do, Alex, there's so much, they're much more rewarding for me, and I feel better the rest of the night, the next day. When we go for a walk, right? We're going outside. I mean, so often we're not even appreciating the weather, appreciating the sounds of the birds in the sky, those little things that make life so enjoyable and pleasurable. That's what mindfulness is all about.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you say that, because you're right. Most of the times we are an autopilot in life, that we're just constantly thinking about the next thing. And rarely do we sit and just literally enjoy the moment, which is all we really have. We don't have tomorrow. We don't have the next 5 minutes. We have now, because this is the only thing that we have. And as I've said before, like, most of us live in our imagination, which is the future, and our memories, which is the past, but we never live here in this moment. And, every once in a while I'll catch myself living in the moment.
Every once in a while. And it's awesome when we're able to do it, right?
Right. Because I was like sitting there, I was, one of these days, a few days ago, I had, my family was in the kitchen. We were all getting ready for morning and getting the kids off to school and stuff. And I just sat there. I was like, hey, this is awesome.
This is nice, right?
This is nice. I love these guys, but it was just that moment it was a moment of clarity of going, Or when you're walking in, a beautiful in nature somewhere, and you're just like, man, look at that tree. Right. Like, you never think about trees, but when you were like in a national park or something, you're like, wow, where am I? Or if you're in Greece in the Parthenon, then you're sitting there, you're like, look where I am. Socrates walked where I'm walking right now. Like,
And,
that's pretty cool.
and I'll tell you, and this stuff is totally evidence-based. So some people listening to this would be like, oh, that's woo-woo,
Right.
that's not gonna work, right? But I'll tell you, I have patients all the time, even patients who are depressed, and they'll tell me, doc, when I started a mindfulness practice, the trees in my neighborhood, they look brighter. And the world just started to look more beautiful. And I started finding pleasure in these things that I just took for granted. So this stuff works.
It's something that the Tibetan monks and Buddhist monks and yogis have been just talking about for thousands of years, of enjoying every moment of your life as it happens. And I know it's so hard for us here in the West to think about that, because we're always constantly, but when you slow yourself down to a moment to really truly enjoy what you are experiencing, life becomes more full.
Right.
It becomes more, you become more at ease, because you're not anxious about what's going to happen in the next 15 minutes. You're just like, you know what? I just got to worry about what's in front of me right now. It was, I was speaking to someone the other day, and they said, the only thing you can control is to the ends of your fingertips. Yeah. That's all the control you have. You have no control about anybody else or anything else other than what you have to the ends of your fingertips. Right. And I thought that was so beautifully stated. I was like, because you're right. It's only literally from the edges of your fingertips. Anything beyond the fingertips, can't control another person. You can't control how they feel, how they act, how they react, but you can control how you act, how you react to certain things.
And realizing, accepting that we can't control all of this stuff out there can be extremely comforting, I think. But then we're not trying to, write the story, right? I mean,
you're right. It's like you're trying to, like, when you realize that you can't control everything, which we all want to control everything, because then goes back to the whole thing that we want to control our comfort zone, but you can't. It's not possible. You can't control the world. You can't control other people. To a certain extent, you can't control anything else other than yourself. And once you understand and accept radical acceptance of, I have no control other than the things that are within my finger, like up until the point of my fingertips, that is so freeing, because our monkey brain is like, well, you got to control this and you got to control this. And sometimes, I'll talk to a friend of mine and they're like, oh man, I have this problem. I'm like, can you control that? Right. Well, no, it's, I think I have to wait for this to happen. I'm like, why are you worrying about it? Like, you worrying about it is not going to get the tax bill here any faster.
Right.
If your passport is lost in the mail, guess what? It's lost in the mail, and you're going to have to deal with it when it comes. But why worry about something that hasn't happened yet? Because most of the things that we worry about most of the times don't happen, because we have much better imaginations than what happens in real life.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
So, Doc, where can people find this amazing book, The Self-Healing Mind?
So you can check out my website. That's gregoryscottbrown.com. You can order the book there. And you could follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Gregory S. Brown, MD.
Dr. Gregory, man, it's been a pleasure talking to you, my friend. I appreciate you writing this book. I appreciate you becoming on the show and bringing awareness to this crisis, I think, that we all are having about mental health, and talking it more clearly, especially for guys, but for everybody listening, being able to talk about mental health freely and get help that you need. And I love your approach of the self-care as one of the main elements that you can do to put the power back in your own hands to heal yourself, in addition to other therapies and medicines as well. But you have the pharmacy in your mind if you know how to access it. So I appreciate you, my friend.
I enjoyed being on. Thanks so much, Alex.